shirts theme song. Nice shirts. Yeah.
Stefie.
Hi, Johnny. Hi, Fu.
Hi, Stefie.
Nice to see
Yeah.
you.
Here, we usually call you Stefie Gan, but would you like to see how the transition of how that your family name become to like this version and what it's supposed to be? Yeah.
Right. In Malaysia, it's pronounced like Gan. It's a dialect from Fujian, but in Mandarin, it's Yan, and then in Cantonese, it's Ngan.
Nice.
So there's like very different pronunciations, and then in America, I just go by Gan because it rhymes with a tan, and it's a similar spelling. I feel like it's easier. And in the beginning, I wasn't sure what to tell people. So I felt like people got really confused when they see Gan, and then the pronunciation is kind of off. So just decided to go with Gan.
I'm really curious. How's that mental? Like you just accept it, or you feel like in the future you will love people to pronounce the right way?
Right. I think this happened very early on. I picked it up really quickly as a child. I just went with the Americanized version, and that even included the way I speak. It's like the American accent. This is how you pronounce things. So because in Malaysia, people speak with a different accent. I think it's because it's like a mix of localized language and also just the studying English under British education. But then also it's very specific. Like Singaporeans have a very specific English accent too. Well, yeah, I just go with Gan. Now it's stuck. It's been like that for many years. Yeah, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and especially as a child, the intentional use of just the most American thing to not be other, just make it simple, make it American, and yeah.
Yeah. I ask you about this is also because I feel relate to that because like I'm Fu Yang but my spelling is Yang, and I don't know how our mindset goes to that. Like, oh, so many people just pronounce it Yan. So even I sometimes just say my name is Fu Yan, but feels just not like me. Like it's kind of different version. So yeah, it's nice to know.
Even converting it into English letters, right? It's this a pronunciation. And then when you say it in a very specific way, I mean, there's no problem with it. I think people now have more patience to get the name more accurately, the pronunciation.
Yeah.
But I think as a child, just get made fun of. So like, okay, never mind.
Can you help the audience to like get to know more of like your growing up background?
I lived here. I was born in Manhattan, and I lived here for a few years. And then my family's from Malaysia, so we went back. And then I didn't come back here until I was in second grade. My mom wanted me to be closer to family, and also her parents had some health concerns. So we went back, and I spent a few years there. And I actually forgotten that I was American and didn't know anything about it. And once my parents said, "Hi, you're going back to America." Oh, I don't remember that place. So when I came here, I actually didn't know how to speak English very well. And I spoke Cantonese mainly. That's the part where I started trying to figure out what is, the social situation in school. And it was a tense thing as a child to understand the culture and so many different cultures and what kids make fun of. And so I think definitely being other was a uncomfortable thing. Like people even speaking in a different language, people did make a remark about that just because they don't understand. So they laugh at it. Like, why is she speaking weirdly? Or so yeah, that started my journey to try to be more American and outwardly, I guess.
Was there anything like in particular looking back that you think you did the most that you are now kind of reclaiming?
Well, now I'm more open to talking about my stories and processing it embracing my culture.
Hmm.
And that really defines how I experience the world and also my childhood experiences. Prior to that, I rarely had to examine any of my personal stories. I just don't think it's embraced in school until like the college application essay. They're like, tell me about you. I think that was the time when I started thinking, oh, me. Because in school, it was a lot about learning other people's stories and then understanding what did this story mean, like reading comprehension, things like that. So yeah, it was when I got to college, I began exploring my own stories. That made academia more interesting for me because I was able to actually combine myself in my work versus in the past, it was like, just keep that aside, and I really wanted to talk about it, but there was no channel.
Was USC the first school you went to for college?
No, I went to Barnard. It's a sister school of Columbia University, and I studied architecture. So I didn't explore the stories fully until I went to film school at USC.
You studied architecture?
Yeah, I kind of tried exploring my culture through architecture, through urban studies. I studied the city of Kuala Lumpur, just comparing lifestyles of city goers there versus here, the access to public space, sort of like indirectly studying how people live there versus here. And it's a lot of mall culture there. I mean, it's a really tropical country and hot. And but the one difference I noticed was there was just a lot of access to public space here that I enjoyed growing up. Parks, the weather's different, but just the public life in New York City, it's like a very unique city. I think not a lot of places are like that, but it was just so accessible, trains and walking, but it wasn't like that in Malaysia. So just comparing how I got around.
How loud New York is.
Yeah. I liked it actually as a New Yorker, but it was until later that I lived somewhere else I realized, oh, it's actually nice and peaceful. I ended up seeing more, but for a really long time, I thought I was New York is the best, and I don't need to go anywhere else. It's very. Yeah, I think all New Yorkers kind of feel that way.
Yeah. So how did you, as a happy New Yorker who hated everywhere else in the world, how did you go from architect Barnard to USC animation?
Yeah, it wasn't a direct path. I took some time between undergrad and graduate school to take night classes and meet the community in animation.
Wait, I'm sorry. Graduate, like you already had a degree in architecture. You weren't just, this isn't like, oh, I did it for a semester and said, no, I'm going to go do animation. You finished architecture degree.
Right. Yes. I finished the architecture degree, and then architecture majors are known to stay up late, build models, but I think they're known for that because in a lot of schools, I guess they have architecture majors, but being an animation major, I was like, oh, they stay up late a lot too. So
if it's stop motion, they do the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Any kind of creative, you're working on your project, you're really it's crunch time. It's always about, okay, you just stop the project. It's not completely finished the way you want it to be, if there's a timeline, deadline. But yeah, what brought me out to California was the increasing interest in animation. I was doing a lot of night classes in New York and meeting the community, but it just felt like everybody's always talking about California. That's where the industry is. And eventually I wanted to really get my hands kind of more crafty and be more capable of filmmaking. And I applied to USC. I didn't get in the first time, but then I later got in, and it took some time actually deciding whether to go because it's an expensive school and or an art degree. So back and forth. And, what ended up happening was I decided, well, this is a great opportunity. And USC actually has a lot of funding opportunities. So it was still like not 100% that I was going to get funded, but it was a pretty good chance. I spoke to a lot of professors and the faculty and the staff. And then I took a plunge and I went. I think this is my reset. I'm going into animation. I'm going to make films. And what it ended up happening is I ended up getting opportunities and grants and fellowship, and I didn't end up in debt, and it was pretty funded. So.
That alone gets an award. Going to USC and leaving like going, I don't owe you anything is, I think, its own feat.
I would say that was the most ideal situation to be in. I wouldn't want to be in a lot of debt and trying to get my career going.
Yeah, when you talk about the funding, because like some of your films are get some funding or maybe some grant. When you mention the funding, is that they support you for your scholarship or is support for your film project? And what do you think what helps you to have them?
Mm-hmm. So for USC, the only film that they fund is the thesis project, which is the last year's film. Mm-hmm. And all the other films are made in class. So when I said funding, it was funding like tuition and boarding, like just having that experience. Otherwise, I think it was written out to be like $70,000 a year or something like that. Maybe it's higher. I just threw out a number. And before going to film school, I was trying to do that myself, taking night classes, trying to learn it myself. But it is a different experience being immersed in a program where they have everything set up and it's intense and there's accountability. And I work really well in school. I think I love being in school. So it was like a great environment for me. I feel like a different person pre going to school in terms of my ability as a filmmaker. Pre-school and then after school, I made films. I feel more confident about making future projects and I have more of a direction.
You went as an undergraduate for animation, right?
No, for undergrad. I went
for
as
USC.
a grad. So I got an MFA, which is also something that I am happy about because it is a terminal degree in art, and I'm hoping to teach eventually. And
like a terminal illness, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Terminal, like the end.
Yeah. You got an animation degree? Ooh, you're done.
They do offer like a PhDs as well if you do want to be in school longer.
How are you so low key, calm, and like humble about this? I did architecture for a bit, GRE tests and everything already, and now you're just like, I have an MFA. You're very calm about it.
Well, I guess the journey is not as calm, but now looking back, it's like, I've been there. Yeah. I'm somewhere else. The journey was hard. It took a lot of soul searching and personal development to not be so stressed about what am I going to do tomorrow? Or what's this, this year, when am I going to make it? Like all those questions of, when am I going to get into here and here or get noticed? It was a lot of that, starting out, anxiety and impatience and and uncertainty. But now I've learned to embrace it. And I think the main thing was just being more present in my journey. Like, okay, well, I'm able to make something. And that's what I asked for going to this field. It's not to win Oscars. Everybody wants that. But I don't think you get into a field and that's the goal. So I think it's learning to go, well, I'm able to explore my own personal stories and be creative and gain some skills. It's not bad. It's pretty great.
I'm curious. So was there because you said your interest kept getting more and more about animation. Was there like a specific film or something that happened? And then also on a completely unrelated 2-part question, because why not? You already were drawing for architecture, so you had perspective. Did that really inform storyboarding for you too?
Yeah, so actually drawing perspective in architecture totally confused me in terms of perspective for film, because perspective architecture is drafting based and everything is parallel, like lines. There's no perspective vanishing point. It's for clarity and construction. So everything is actually parallel, like it doesn't vanish into a point. So when I had to draw realistically, like what you see with your eyes, like I was confused. So, how does this So I was used to drawing more technical drawings for architecture. That was more like have a plan and you just do parallel lines everywhere. And the measurements, it's all about the measurements and scale, not, well, that's not what you see with your eyes. So I had to kind of flip, and it's still a challenge for me. I'm still trying to get that. It's definitely more creative as a filmmaker. It's more interesting for the film's eye line to be lower than for you to be up on top. But I feel like if you're actually diagramming in architecture, it's a lot of what does this look like on top? What does this look like? It's well, like you want to see everything, but in film, you don't want to see everything. You want to get into, you wouldn't do like do a point of view from a dog's point of view. And like, why, this is a very interesting camera shot, but so I think it's very subjective camera in film and which is why I actually liked going to animation because of the subjectivity and the personal storytelling. The thing that actually helped me a lot being an architecture major was the research aspect and the really like the strong conceptual thinking. At every creative project, we would do a lot of research, a lot of trying to understand like big concept things. And I think that helped me in terms of filmmaking, being really analytical and critical and trying to like do my research and in architecture to say, if you're stuck, just do 10 things. And I think that's true for any kind of creative endeavor. If you're stuck, just make 10 different things, like make more things. That's how you get unstuck. So I think those things translated well. Other things, it's a lot to go back because I'm like, wow, I studied so many cool things about cities in architecture, and I would love to bring that into film. But it's like big, my mind can't hold that right now.
So was there like a specific film or anything was there some sort of catalyst that launched you into this?
Well, I love Miyazaki films, and I was in architecture as a student and really stressed, and I would watch Miyazaki films. I would escape there. Thought, wow, I really want to be telling stories like these. I want to make something meaningful like this. And why is this connecting with me so much? And
what is this perspective?
Yeah, and I love Kiki's delivery service. That's actually very similar to an artist's journey of just stuck and trying to make it out there. And I decided I wanted to go into animation after. I kind of decided during my program, but I have to finish it. I didn't want to have transfer or anything. I didn't really know too much about animation then either. So I didn't even think that was an option. I just thought, okay, let's just finish the degree and then kind of explore later. But that was the catalyst, seeing a lot of Miyazaki's films, and it was so powerful for me. And I had a lot of stories I wanted to tell. It didn't happen overnight because I had trouble telling them the story, and they still inspire me, the films. And reading his memoir or book Starting Point and Turning Point, his essays are inspiring. Always watching the way he talks about the creative process. I think it's just a very human experience that I'm very interested in. And in architecture, it was very much like you're not connected with people as much. Like the projects it's a bit removed for me. And I have friends who are doing architecture. It's fine.
Right.
I think it's just a different, my brain just, I gravitate towards animation more for my writing background before architecture. I love writing short stories, and that kind of was there always. I was just writing, and now I have a channel for it.
That explains something else then, because something else about you that's fascinating is you can draw very well, you can board really well, but you do script first, which is for people who draw often unusual.
I would say that that's true from meeting my classmates who are more visual people. I gravitate more towards the story, and it happens in my head first in words and its moments. And that's how I think. I think it's probably because I had access to words first, maybe. Like that's just how I emotionally explored my ideas as a child. And it's the exposure to books, probably. Like some of the books I read talked about really personal things. And I was able to get into the head of the characters. I thought, wow, I want to write like this or tell stories like these. And that's kind of what got me into the self-exploration and expression because of the books I read that really got into certain ideas and stories. And wow, I'm really inside the head of this character right now. It's so powerful. Wow, this is amazing. So yeah, animation came about because it was just a cool medium. I did think about majoring in English and maybe just becoming a full-on writer, but then some part of me is just like really worried about that. I was like, well, not exactly. I really love art, and I don't know. So
I was concerned about the job security of writing, so I went to animation.
right. And yeah, so I think it's just the practice. I still write now, and sometimes I think it is the being such an ideas person. I'm always thinking, wow, this could be a short story, this could be a book, this could be a film. It's like all the mediums are just exploding. Yeah. Now my new thing is to work on one thing at a time. Just one thing is good enough.
That's not the artist way.
Yeah, it's a form of procrastination. Like when I'm working on a film, I'm always thinking, oh, I wish I was working on this other thing that's super cool and don't have a line.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to choose, and time is limit, and because today we are going to introduce to everyone, there are 3 films which are like a thread, like they are all very connected to each other. And because we talk about writing, so that now we know that will be the process for you when starting the film. You start with the script first, and can we have like those 3 films maybe through timeline? What goes first and middle and most lately?
So for my films, the production date, the first one was Journey to Across the Bridge, which is about an immigrant mother connecting with her child who's first generation American, and it's a train ride. And then the second film is Illegitimate Voice, which is about a documentary that I made with a group of other co-directors based on an interview that I did about my growing up experience. So in terms of timeline, this might be before like the actual timeline, but production timeline wise, I made that second. And then the third film is my thesis film, Joss Lotuses to Grandma, inspired by the passing of my own grandmother, and then later reconciling those feelings. So the trilogy, I didn't mean for them to be trilogies, but as I was making my film, I just went for my own kind of childhood inspirations. It's a great source of inspiration for me. And if you're going to work on a film that long, it's like that feeling that you need to keep it going. But yeah, in terms of timeline, my actual timeline, I would say it's pretty close to these experiences of, growing up and then reconciling with like bullying and feeling other, and then also trying to get up to speed to be outwardly American so people don't pick on you was sort of the goal in the first few years of childhood. And that, usually meant not having an accent or not doing anything too cultural, because if you appeared anyway, they're going to ask you, where are you from? Why do you sound different? And kind of go into it. That went on until later. It's like once achieved, it's like, oh, then I think about this idea of a voice, which is why animation and writing is powerful, because I feel like I can find my voice. I felt like there were so many experiences I wanted to share that I didn't. And my voice, my personal voice, was kind of kept quiet. In my second film, it was actually an hour-long interview, the documentary about my growing up experience, that was condensed into like a 5-minute film.
Well, that's a lot to cut out.
Yeah, we just went with the essence. I guess it's really hard to animate so many minutes of it. It just went to the core of, my message, which was growing up, I had to put a lot of that aside, my culture, and just feeling fear. I had grown up in an undocumented family as well. So it was very much, oh, you don't want to look too different, and you don't want people to ask so many questions, and also feeling attacked if people were to feel like, oh, okay, well, you're other. So later on, I began exploring more of what those experiences growing up meant, and I'm able to talk about it more, and finally just use my voice. Like, and that was inspired by activism, when I saw just people using their voices in media, in protests and legislation. So a lot of my work, I mean, that film later ends in the message of actually just connecting with community and joining a cause and going into activism, which was, I wouldn't have found that path if I didn't grow up the way I did. And I think that is that's the inspiring part of it for me.
So you picked the topic and then you sat down with your classmates and they interviewed you and you just recorded it, or it was a pre-existing interview? Or
the process of that production was, everybody pitched an idea, and and mine got voted in as the story they want to do. And then, yes, for the hour-long interview, everybody asked a question. And from that recording, we all edited down to 5 minutes of it, or less than that, of really core, important things that we feel like should be in the film.
just to your most painful memories, like just hone it down.
Yeah. And then trying to make it make sense too, like in terms of narrative. And every time I make a film, I do feel like there's something that I'm releasing from myself out there, and that the burden is lesser, because there are some things where I have a story or I want to say something and I keep it inside of me. I just feel it getting heavier and heavier, and I feel like the making of these films, just the process of going through them, and making a film is a grueling process. So I think, and also emotionally, you're expressing something. So I feel lighter, as you mentioned, Johnny. Like, how do you feel so light? I think it's because I'm releasing my burdens.
Yeah, you pull the toxic out. It's actually like they have a study to say, like, if you keep something in secrecy, and it's not only you mentally will feel that weight and that burden, you physically will feel that too. Like it's like climbing up a slope or something. Like it's both affected.
I agree. It's also taking something out of your head and just being physical with it, like do something with it, like in motion. Because if you're just churning it in your head, it's just in your head, and your head like feels that weight. And another example is Joss Lotus's grandma. Before making that film, I hadn't fully processed the passing of my grandmother, and while making it, it was a very emotional process. I actually started out as a grief letter. I mentioned the writing part, which was, I had read somewhere, how do you process someone who's really important to you passed away? And it started out as 3 questions, which was, what do you wish you can say to your grandmother, or in this example, my grandmother? And there were so many things I wanted to say, because, in the film I said, I was busy studying in school. I didn't connect with you. So I felt like I had this really nice childhood with her, and it's very innocent. It was all about play. And then later it became grinding for me, like in school, getting grades. And as I was doing that, just life passes by, and then she's gone. And so I feel like there was a lot I wanted to say and apologize for. And so and then the second one is, what do you, actually forgotten completely the 3 questions, but eventually I was like, what would she say to you? And so the film is kind of structured around that, but it was a very emotional process writing that. But once I was done with the film, I just felt like it was processing those feelings. And I felt like I let go, and it's not quite as heavy.
Just total catharsis.
Right. Yeah, it is. And when I was making that with my team, a lot of people related to that because they also grew up with their grandmothers. And it was also during that time when a lot of people were starting to lose their grandparent or they're sick. So I'm glad to have people who really connected with the film to help me make it. So.
It's a big team for this production.
It's a 7-minute film.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to know that the film formed the first part is like you writing a letter and thinking of how you would translate that emotion, and also how would your grandmother will talk to you. Like, are those questions like be guided through the school construction, like some mentor help you to search for that, or it's you do it by yourself?
Yeah, that was the research part. I guess when I was making that film, I thought, how am I going to make this film? It starts from a feeling. It's like, I want to make a film about my grandmother and how important she was to me.
Yeah.
And the structure really came about afterwards when I did research about, well, I need to process this. At first I was very, the burden was so heavy that I felt like, well, I don't want to make a bad film about my grandma. And that's gonna be like totally
tarnished memory. Right.
But it's in the making of that, I figured it out. Like I was doing a lot of research and I'm like, well, how do I make a film? It became too close in the beginning. It was hard to find the structure, and it was hard to really find out what the film was about. So the structure came about from those 3 questions that I found, and it was not related to animation at all. It was about, how do you grieve someone? And from that letter, I found out, well, this is actually the important things I wanted to say, which is I really enjoyed the childhood we had, and I'm sorry for kind of not connecting and being so far away. And that was not really mentioned in the film. About, it's kind of like from the other films, you can kind of piece together what happened. It's hard to tell everything in a few minutes. But yeah, I think, families being separated by globally, it's just like, it's very difficult when someone passes away in another country and you're not able to be there. And then the end, it's like kind of the resolution, which is what I wish to hear from her. It's just that it's okay. I'm proud of you and you're okay. It's going to be okay. So the rest of the visuals I figured out through storyboarding, which is through training. It's like, what would actually captivate the audience? So sometimes it is it fights with each other, like the writing part and the visual part.
Yeah.
Taken a class with directors who were like, it's visual, it's all visual. And I'm being a writer. It's like, well, I have all these big ideas. So I always have to go back to the storyboarding part, which is, well, what are we actually seeing on the screen? Like, it's hard to express, well, I'm experiencing grief right now. Like, you wouldn't show a person just crying in a corner. So
for your freshman year films, you might.
Yeah, and yeah, that's true. So my first film, I would say I've grown from there. At first I was like, it's 2 people on a train, and this professor would say, why would you do that? You can make any film you want. Why would you put them on a train? There's perks of being in film school and learning the craft, and then my ideas still haven't changed, but it's like I learned this craft of like, how do you tell stories better and how do you engage?
You said, because you write first and they're very personal stories to you, so I'm sure it must be immensely hard to edit them to time when it's that personal. And then you board it, and you said the boarding will change the writing. So can you give us an example of something you boarded on one of them, and then you're like, okay, I got to rewrite this to now match the visual?
Yeah. That's why I think my films, after making it's just like a burdens out, and it's not completely mine anymore. Like, that's the feeling, because once you had hands on it, it's like, okay, well, this is a whole other product. And I think probably writing is the most pure for me. It's like, it comes from me to paper, and that's my inspiration point. I think once it gets to film, or even any kind of creative endeavor, it's like, well, this is inspired by, it's not like word for word, this is completely what happened to me. And sometimes you just have to, like, well, structure wise, I have to put a moment here, and then it's like I kind of come up with something else. This process, for example, it came from this really personal need to tell the story, but I didn't know how to tell it. So I just end up writing, and even from the grief letter, I took parts that would kind of make sense and to put in the narrative. But the visual part, it was just coming up with, well, now I have to think about the entertainment value. And how do you show that? And it's a very different, it's like working backwards. One, it's like, oh, this is what I want to say. And then second, it's like, well, okay, how would people connect with this? Well, I have to create a cute girl that people would want to care about. It'd be a really nice relationship. And then, you know, something quirky has to happen, or you got to do some interesting shots here and there. And I need also some metaphors. I need metaphors and symbols. I need to come up with. So I came up with dolls, and she was also a very pious person, and she taught me all these things about religion, and that's something that I grabbed from. So yeah, I was just thinking about what can actually be shown visually. I thought, oh, it'd be so entertaining and funny for me to talk about all these ideas she had of gods and stories of them.
That's an amazing point, though. Like,
Yeah.
because your message is conveying the emotion and feeling to the audience, not so much the story. So you have to alter the story to be the feeling that you have that grasp by the viewer.
You know, a tool that I now have, it's like, well, how do I show this? How do I tell a story that show this? It's really about, it feels like working backwards, because I don't think like that. I don't think shots. I don't think, you know, moments. But film, you kind of have to, because you basically are communicating an emotion to an audience through pictures. And whereas being a writing background, I think words, I'm like, wow, I'm pouring my soul out right now. It's like really emotional. But in film, it might not work because people don't get the same feeling. And it's really about metaphors and symbols in film. Like, you know, a pair of shoes can be really emotional. It's like, oh, wow, you're like crying watching a pair of shoes. And you're like, how did that happen? Well, you have to kind of see that. And so I see my life now differently too. Like I end up seeing, oh, wow, why am I reacting so much to just like cloth? Oh, okay, it means something. Then I have to like go back, and one informs the other.
I'm just imagining you now at like Foot Locker, just crying your eyes out every time you go in. They're like, what is happening?
Yeah, it's well, we don't know, but you know, if you watch this journey, then you know why it's important. Yeah, I use symbols in my film, and those paper dolls that at first I think a lot of people don't get what they are. It's very specific, burning things you want for your ancestors. And I thought that's a very emotional point. It's like all these, as a grieving process, all these things you wish they're going to have that they didn't. It's like making up for their time here. It's like all the hopes and that you want for them.
Yeah, some are even not only dolls but houses or
right. Yeah, houses, money, you burn houses, you burn
like small toy houses, right?
Yeah, they're paper.
Okay, just
it's all paper.
being clear.
Bigger scale too, like yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny now. People are burning like cell phones.
Oh yeah.
Wait, really?
Kids. And yeah, I think that came from research and also just what my grandmother did. So, for example, I wasn't too close with all the practices, but I remember that was what she did. So I did some research and kind of picked together things that I was somewhat familiar with and seemed to have a lot of meaning. Yeah.
And you mentioned about like your production usually have a big team, like sometimes maybe 16 students working with you.
16?
I think so.
It was like for this one, I felt like I had like 30 people in total.
Whole class,
including sound and voice talent. And,
even storyboard or animators, and a lot they can connect with you by their similar experience or by the emotion they relate to you, so they join in the project with you. But can you share, like, sometimes is there any difficulties when you try to share with them with different culture? Like, how do you let them do their research and try to keep it authentic as possible, or let them get the similar metaphor or the punch in this story? Like, how you communicate with them with this?
You know, for this film, I did come across people who might not understand what this all is. that the challenge then is to try to explain that through moments and storyboarding, showing what kind of having to explain what they are. So we see grandma burning them and then saying something to the ancestors. And, we don't fully understand what they are, but we know they're kind of something you give to the ancestors. I didn't get too much pushback about these things, but I do feel like the true meaning of them is not quite expressed, but it's expressed enough. Like you don't fully understand, or I don't fully explain everything, but it's just something cultural that even now I forget that it's very specific to a culture. I'm like, oh, I guess some people watching this might be confused what she's doing. And I think that's why I had to establish in the beginning what it is, because otherwise, why is she taking those aren't toys? We thought they were toys. I remember that happening to me maybe, it wasn't with the dolls, but yeah, I did play with, it was like very funny. And I think for me, like even though some moments are very personal, I tend to think of moments as funny. Like this is really funny. Funny in terms of like, this is odd. It's a very odd experience. And yeah, the shopping and all the rituals, I couldn't explain everything. And that's the limit of the film, like having to go to like temples. And, we didn't fully talk about the stories of the gods. We just know that they're scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't get too much pushback. And the pushback, the experience is, I would consider it and then it's what it is now, the film. Maybe the film was veering towards somewhere else, but then to make it make sense, I guess it became what it is. And I purposely kept in some things, even though people might not understand what they are, just for myself. It's like very specific, like even in dialogue, she was mentioning some items that we might like, what is that? But it's okay.
How do you pick something you're like, okay, this is going to mean nothing to anyone outside of the area that I lived in, or even outside of like my family? How do you decide when you're like, no, that just stays, and if they don't get it, they don't get it?
Well, I guess ultimately I wanted to make a film that people will connect with. So after the initial inspiration, I did think more in terms of what the audience's journey. And I did learn from a professor that you cannot be selfish with a film, because a film is meant for somebody else to watch it. It's not like you're not just watching it yourself.
Right.
So yeah. So I thought more in terms of the structure of the film and what I needed at the moments. This is like the quirky timeline. This is the challenge, some obstacle one, cue obstacle number 2. But I also thought in terms of like what would be entertaining. So like the arc of just a child stealing candy. Like that's a challenge, and that's something a child would do. And I think I attempted.
An adult.
I thought about it. I actually don't think I was too scared to attempt something like that.
To steal candy?
Yes, from the gods. I was really worried about the gods.
Oh, I'd accept that smite any day for some candy. No problem.
Oh, well, okay. Well, my grandma told me lots of stories, and it really went into my head. So yeah, it felt, I really felt like those gods were alive, and I thought back into, there were so many things that were not in the film, and if I were to include it, it would be even weirder. Oh, that's odd. And there'll be so many moments of just odd things happening.
All right, give us. Come on, we need one.
Like I used to, my grandmother would go to the temple and get this piece of paper that would be blessed by the gods. And then she would burn this piece of paper and put water on it and have me drink it. And that's how I would get blessed.
Yeah,
like, right. I think that was a moment in the film at some point, but it didn't connect with anything else. There was just like a lot of little things like that, like things I would carry around. I carried around like items that were supposed to protect me.
That's awesome. What were they?
Yeah, there's some items made into the film, like the stick.
Okay. Well, sticks protect a lot of people. They're very useful.
Yeah, I really thought, I mean, I thought everything that happened as a child, I just felt like it's not funny because it's like, wow, just imagine a child really buying into it. So I thought like it's kind of like Ghostbusters, like it's sucked into the stick, like you can't see it, but the things are being sucked in.
You remember that stick have a name?
I don't know. This grandma has so many items. I don't know what they're called. She just
Like,
presents it.
you get older, you're like, wait a minute, I think grandma was just a hoarder and they said everything was blessed.
Everything has a meaning.
You could tell though from the film that at least the altar of God statues terrified you as a child because the way that they're portrayed is how large and menacing they are when you're looking at them.
And they used to have these red lights too. It was very scary. It's like, what?
I would like to search why is that color, right? Is that by the candle or?
Yeah, I think it's like red is just a color of prosperity, and
Oh, okay.
I probably think that's it. But I remember they scared me as a child, and also their faces. It's a very different feeling of this God loves you, and they're very smiling, and
you got one with a big sword. Yeah.
Right, yeah, their faces, they're like very animated, and they're not smiling, they're like being really serious.
Yeah, they are like a more protector look.
Right. Yeah, I was just worried about them, and also gods are used to be kind of like a fear-inducing thing for kids, like don't do this or else
Right.
gods are watching, and yeah.
And if it's a pantheon, then you got like so many more gods to watch you. It's like, oh, this is even more stressful.
I use that as a theme in the film of just, all these things eventually spiritually help me to connect with my grandmother, and because I come, right first, I wrote a long thing about grief and community and witnessing of things. And this was, I was inspired by the pandemic, and there was a study mentioned about just how it's important to witness certain, like as a community get together to celebrate, weddings or celebrate people and celebrate births, and then also just acknowledge passings. And thought, that's probably something that was missing, like this not being able to join in on the community to acknowledge the passing of my grandmother. So I thought, even though these were such, funny things that I learned as a kid that I didn't quite understand, it is a way of acknowledging ancestors and paying respects. And so this funny thing becomes this meaningful thing later. It's like understanding why it was important to her. But it was just funny when I think back about it, all these things that I saw her doing.
Now, when you say your writings, are these writings that you put out? Are these available to be read?
Well, I'm thinking about it more now to publish some of them, but no, a lot of them are just start as written forms that don't quite have like a beginning, middle, end. It's very much like, these are my feelings. I write them all out, and so they're not so contained. Which I feel like when you kind of share something out there, you kind of have to tailor your work. That's the part where I mentioned, the pureness of it is when I share on, when I write it out, and then later it's like the editing part of it that makes it more
right.
Okay, now I'm sharing this piece that's more for people to consume.
Because you have to explain a state of mind and a feeling that you had developed your life to get to. And then trying to get someone who grew up on a different continent, maybe they never even knew the grandma, or maybe all the grandparents are still alive. Like trying to explain those is just wild. It's as close as you can get to like ESP. It's hard.
And I am moved when people do react to the film and they think, oh, this makes me think about my own grandparents or just family. And I think the goal of the film is for people to connect in that way and just have a moment to reflect on, special memories with their family or just to go through this emotional journey with me. Yeah, so I'm glad people connect with it, even across cultures. Like people who didn't grow up in that culture still connect with it because they also did other things with their own grandmother. I think maybe there's just like, because it's a generation or two generations apart, like you do feel like relationships with the grandmother is slightly more different, interesting.
Yeah. So the three films we're talking about, the styles are, I know there are teams involved with them, but the styles change. And then something that we even haven't talked about that you did with like the one that you did at the festival with Fu, your own film at the same festival Fu was in, is your style is very different in each of these. So the one you did is very different from the ones you did with teams. Are you trying to hone the style? Like, have you gotten more to where you wanted to be? Or what is it that created that change from each one?
Mm-hmm. I would say the three films here that we're talking about are more 2D animation and more production line style. The other films I made related to climate change, and the one that you're referring to, the latest one, Carbon Traces, was my own desire to just explore a different medium and be away from the computer. So I worked with my hands with an actual medium I can touch. And I took a picture and took thousands of pictures to make the film. And it was just taking a break from this 2D animation style that was grueling. It was like multiple passes. Yeah, I wanted to take a break from that style and just work with something that I could touch and I could see and I could play with. So I would say those are more experimental styles because you are experimenting with the medium and trying to find, express different things with the medium. And then ones I animated objects or trash to prove the point. I would say those films are more possible as like sort of a one person animator. Like, although Fu, you made your whole film yourself as well. I mean, any style is accessible if that's, the person wants to commit to it. But I wanted to just explore a different style under the camera.
It's to the story you want to tell.
Yeah, it was a metaphor to carbon emissions. It was animated with charcoal and carbon filings, and it was dirty. It was gritty.
Is that technically stop motion then, or what would that be?
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, I guess it is a type of stop motion. It's and under the camera techniques. I feel like everything is kind of a stop motion, right? Because you're basically animation. But it's, Fu does like character stop motion, which is way more challenging because you have to animate a character versus like a whole medium.
Oh no, I think it's very, very challenging to me.
Yeah, so I would say it's stop motion, but there's not character based. It's like we're not following the journey of a character specifically, kind of more loosely defined.
So your picture and with flow, and it's
it's more like under the camera,
like sand animation or something.
Right. Yeah. It could be sand, paint, objects. But yeah, it is something more tactile, more closely related to stop motion than all digitized.
Was everything you owned, like, did you have half your outfits basically just ruined with charcoal fingerprints for a while?
Yes, I had, I definitely had dirty fingers for a while, and wore a mask, and my sweaters had some rubs of charcoal, but I contained it pretty well. I wasn't like a Jackson Pollock. That would be cool too, but I tried to contain it. Yeah, I wasn't as messy as I could be. I want to see Jackson Pollock style charcoal.
Just throw it everywhere. How much charcoal did you go through to make that?
I actually just went with what I got. It was like charcoal powder. It was a huge bottle, but I was able to kind of keep a lot of the charcoal. I didn't use a lot of it. So amazingly, a little charcoal goes a long way. It's just so dirty.
That's how the old saying goes. A little charcoal goes a long way.
Yeah, and then some of it I was able to just use the carbon fillings versus actually using like gallons of charcoal dust. It's like, oh, okay, I can just use this here that achieves the same effect without having like
Carbon fillings?
yeah, I ended up using the carbon little sand particles in Brita filters.
Oh, the
Yeah,
stuff that you
so
rinse out for like the first 5 minutes when you switch them?
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I just thought about this idea of carbon cleaning our things. Yeah, this idea of cleaning and too much of it and dirtying and it was a lot of metaphorical thinking of
It's a cool film, and that's a really cool experimental style you did. And then the trash one, I don't think I've seen, but that sounds fascinating too.
yeah, I used a lot of plastic trash to simulate ocean life. So we're kind of watching underwater ocean creatures, but they're all trash creatures.
The phrasing doesn't do it justice.
Yeah, schools of forks and plastic bag blowfish.
Oh, that's pretty good. What was the biggest fish you had in there?
I guess it was like probably more like a chitin. It's like it was just like this big, but it just moved around like this. And those are the ones that off of rocks. Like they would eat the algae off of rocks. Well, scale wise, I mean, in reality, they're pretty small, but they took up the biggest space in the film because the container was big.
3 from school, because you got your senior thesis one, which is the Lotus. You have the Illegitimate was your third year. The train one
Across the bridge.
That was like a second year, first year film?
Yeah, my first year film. That was my first year film. And then my second year is the Legitimate Voice. And then my third year is Joss Lotuses. And actually, I made a lot of films. My first year, I made a few. A previous semester, like the plastic one, I made in the fall. And then there was another film I didn't finish. So close to finishing, though. Just publish. But I just hit publish. And then I made a little short for that was about sea life with some scientists, and then we talked about like amoebas and anemones and
Wow.
yeah,
Just
plankton.
lots of vowels.
Yeah, it got me more interested in collaborating with researchers because it's like my interest. Like they just bring so much concepts, and then they just want someone to communicate their like the ideas and make it magical. So it's like coming from a really strong foundation of, wow, this is all so interesting. Life is interesting.
You have a real narrative style. Like, do you see yourself kind of going towards like documentaries? You always are telling a story about a real thing.
I am going towards more documentary for my future work, finding a topic. Yeah, just someone who has an interesting story to tell, because it's already such a strong voice when you start from the story and then using the visuals to really support that and to bring it forward. So yeah, I think that's the work that interests me.
So an animated documentary about I Am Pei would bring it all full circle.
Yeah, maybe.
No, you're like no more architecture.
For people who wants to try to do animated documentary, do you have any advice or like a startup? What kind of process they should have?
I would say that the interview would drive the film, like finding that the audio. So in documentary, I think the person is the subject. The subject is the driving force. So get their story in. I mean, something about the subject is drawing you to their story, and then just, ask questions, get all the recordings down, and then edit it down. I say working with someone who's good at narrative can help with the editing process. I think the skill as a creative person is trying to make sense somewhat of a sense of our experiences, because everyone has experiences. But I think our work as a creative is, how do you make it into this digestible piece, this moment? And so, yeah, that's the fun part for me as a person who likes narrative and stories, to kind of craft a story out of these experiences. And then the animation part, that could be fluid. I'm advocating for a more an expanded definition of animation, not just what you see on TV traditionally, or 3D or digital, and just, kind of play with it a bit. For example, using sand.
Okay.
Using sand, if that really works with the story. But even digital animation, it doesn't have to be like, the style doesn't have to look, it's basically drawing, right? Digital, it doesn't have to look a certain way. You don't have to close your, I mean, it's I was just going to say, you don't have to close your edges, but coloring it would be hard. I think the style looks a certain way because of the production process. You have to color it and things like that. So, that's why I love like watercolors of its looseness, but it's really hard to animate, right? So I think we're thinking about, I love the look of this, but how do you animate it?
I love the juxtaposition of, you're cramming one of the mediums, documentaries, that tend to benefit the most from slower storytelling and slower pacing and letting the narrative kind of go out, against animation where every minute is a nightmare. You have these two, and what is a happy medium for you in those? Like 7 minutes is fine? Like, how do you at one point go, screw it, we're gonna do live action B-roll shots, or what do you do?
Yeah, that is difficult. Well, for live action, sometimes I think, oh, well, I can explore that too, but I think I'll just stick to animation now.
Oh, you mean it might be a possibility. I was wondering that really animation just help you express in a certain way, and also you are having your labor in it, like your live frame. Or really, you're still open to a live action? It depends.
I find it a very different process. I mean, you can plan a live action film like an animated, but there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I do think that if you can control the whole visual, then animation is the tool for that. It can control everything that you see. And it's like a really, like, the art form is limitless in some ways, because you can show very different things, and you can show metaphors, and things can distort. You can distort from one frame to another. You can stretch things. You can animate between the movements. And that's the acting or the performance that live action really doesn't get you. Person could be melting literally, or morph into something. And I think people are more open to animation now. I know at some point some people don't watch animations, or they don't feel like it's for kids, or something about it just doesn't connect with them the same way. But I'm in it now. I'm just so immersed in it.
You're like, I've gone to school for 12 years. I'm not doing anymore. I'm done.
Yeah, sometimes I forget about that aspect of people's like kind of bias towards mediums, but I think there are fans of animation, and people get it, and that's why the voiceover is important too. When you're hearing someone's story, I think people get that, and that's the poetic part of it too. It's like the audio visual experience.
Yeah, there was a conversation I feel very interested about the voice. It seems like one of your film, maybe it's illegitimate voice. Some people might get some advice like maybe less voice, more visual, or should you keep the voice? Like, can you share how you guys balance it out? How to stand up to some of the perspective you want to keep?
I think with especially when there's a lot of audio information, I think you can let the visual breathe a bit, so it's not like always entertaining you. I think I came up with that issue more for Joss Lotuses, because there was dialogue, and then there was like a story I was showing. Like, there was a moment where there was a lot of performance, so you can't really do both at the same time, because then it's like too much going on. It's like, if the character is doing something at the same time, the character is trying to tell you something. I'd say Illegitimate Voice worked out pretty well, because we did prioritize the audio first. So we animated to the voice. So after we have, okay, this is the script, what do you show in the scene? And so the visual sort of carried the message, the voiceover, and it wasn't quite, there was no competing. There wasn't like a visual we needed to sync a voice to. So when you prioritize one thing, it kind of works out that way. Like, okay, this is this final script. What do you do visually to, and then if something is very powerful, maybe you don't need to show too much. It could be it can be a slower animation or a slower moment to let it breathe.
It's about the pace too, for how we observe.
So you're kind of using animation, how a lot of people use music for a score. Like, you have your narration, your dialogue, or whatever it is, you have your audio, and you're using animation to enhance moments when it needs enhancing and then get out of the way when it doesn't. So it's kind of like audio sweetening, but visually.
Right. Yeah. And the visual part can show a lot more. So when I mentioned there was like an hour long audio that was cut down to a few minutes, in the visuals, we could show a lot more that we did not get into the audio. So there was like a treehouse moment, which, you know, in the audio was a moment where it's like, oh, I would pretend to be in a treehouse. Or there were just moments in the film that visually you can kind of show, like, as the creator, you know, you can put everything in there, but you can show it
like footnotes.
You can create the environment. And then you don't have to have the person say it. You can kind of just present, oh, okay, this is where they lived. And you don't have the person explain, this is where I live. And
that's so cool.
It's a lot of condensed storytelling.
That must help you with the editing then to get it in, because all the subtext is now visual.
Yeah. And in this film, there are different styles, like animation types in it. So how do you guys talk to each other, try to make it unified?
We did have a character design and then we tried to stick to it, even though, you know, we all had our different takes.
Yeah,
the blue hair person.
That blue hair.
Yeah, I think that, you know, somehow it works. I think we're all invested in the story. And I mean, we worked with a team of 15 people. We all have our different styles and we're trying to get the film done by a certain time. So we embraced people's different styles. And also we actually did it during the pandemic, which meant we did it virtually. So it was hard to get together to make the film. If we were all together, we might be animating with the same character, like a physical puppet or something. But because we were all separated, we all just sort of dived in and worked on a scene. So that contributed to the different drawing styles and also just production process. But we got the film done. And and it was, you know, people's expressions of the different scenes is meaningful and also their own take on it. I think when younger Stefie's pulling out, or the older Stefie's pulling out the younger Stefie, like, it was not said in the audio, but visually you can kind of show like there's a moment happening on screen. So I think animation does have the power to tell this other story. Subtle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The next one, you said you're working on one right now.
Oh, well, I'm working on something else that is related to elementary school.
Okay. So you don't have to spoil anything unless you want to. But for doing this style, that's the more narrative documentary style, how do you scope it? How do you decide, okay, that's enough audio, like, I can give it this much time? Because you're doing these on your own still now, right?
Well, going forward, it's going to be a different experience, because I think when you have a sort of more imposed deadline of you have to finish it this semester versus, okay, now you're in charge of these projects. I think, you know, something to consider is budget and is people, and, you know, different than, okay, I have a group of talented people here who are just wants to work on something. So I think for independent filmmaking, it is thinking about those considerations. So I'm probably going to think about, like, before I even commit to a project, it's probably going to be a lot of more development work before committing to a project. Of the investment. And, you know, making short films, it's a hard market to distribute. So it's and the last film I made, Carbon Traces, was based on a grant. So the grant tells you how long the film is, like less than 5.
So superimposed rules and deadlines are amazing for finishing.
Right, exactly. So when I work on something now, it's probably mostly going to be in the pre-production phase, like just getting it ready to be a project sometime. And then also I'm working on bigger projects. I feel like the smaller projects are more for me to learn.
Like what? What are you working on? Yeah.
Well, my bigger project is like a book manuscript, which is like a longer form. So I think the smaller projects were good exercises for getting things done quickly, like in a few months from beginning, middle, end. And then now I'm more invested in longer, bigger projects and then just developing ideas for things.
To quote Aristotle, what the fuck? A book? You're writing a book?
It's something that I've wanted to do even before film school, because of my writing and then art. It's like, oh, this is a natural combination of the two. But now after even studying storyboarding, I do have more tools to creating a graphic novel. But I think for me, I feel like that is the most accessible medium at the moment. Like I could just by myself create a blueprint, because getting a film made is very hard. And the film can still be made after the book is made. So yeah, it seems like a natural transition now.
So is this like the Book of Stefie and it's a graphic novel?
Well, it's based on elementary school children who are just navigating through themes of power and influence and culture and elementary school.
Wait, like what? Give me a level here, like Machiavellian. Like, are they going full Prince in second grade, or what are we doing here?
I say, perhaps maybe it'll develop into that. But it's more like things that happen in school to kids that seem to point at things that just happen to adults in real life, like little kids who are wanting to that do certain things because they want to get ahead in life, for example, and that
right.
Whatever that looks like for an elementary school kid. It's funny, but at the same time, wow, this is very says a lot about our society. And yeah, it was influenced just by the dynamics that I grew up in, just kids wanting to be with smart kids and wanting to be with people who are going to end up being somebody someday. And these are like 8-year-old kids.
Oh, Manhattan.
Yeah.
How do you two remember how you think? Like you already have some young self journals, or how do you flash back?
I had some, and actually those are more grounding for me because I realized, oh, I was like any other kid, because I'm looking at my childhood now through the eyes of an adult, and I'm remembering, I'm like, wow, that must have been. But I would read some entries, I'm like, wow, I was a real kid. I just wanted to be everything. And I think those help because then you realize I'm just like any other kid. I wasn't having deep thoughts. It was wasn't deep all the time. So I think a lot of it is the interpretation of my childhood from now. It's just what I remember. There's some memories that are deeper that I think about, like the power relations I find really interesting. I still think about that. Yeah, like something's hurt, I think, and you kind of remember that and you realize kids learn that early, like what kids care about, what people care about, and you kind of tend to remember those things.
When you look back at some things that like were totally innocuous for most of your life, and then one day like, oh my God, that was up. Like it hits you as an adult of how messed up something was when you were a kid. You're like, oh wow.
Right. And then just understanding where all that is coming from, and that, that's just through understanding as an adult too, like reading more things about other people's experience and realize, oh, okay, well, maybe it's not the kid's fault. It's like totally a societal thing. It's like family values, or it's just from like an individual. It's like kids learn it from somewhere. So
yeah, like as a kid, you don't know. You have no idea what you're repeating or doing.
Yeah. And I think I'm more interested in telling the story because of how deep some of these ideas are. Like to think about, like as an immigrant kid or first gen kid, how they have to think about so many serious things so early about being, their part in society and how to gain power and things like that. Yeah. seems like for a young child to have to navigate through all of that.
Yeah. Oh, especially like talking about like first generation or immigration, this topic, we have some examples from the past, but it's already different from like our generation, like, right? Like different first generation will have different kind of obstacles and the issue or even the value for the job or for the living situation are different. So I'm very looking forward to listen to your story, which a little bit more close to nowadays kind of background.
Right.
For more people to relate.
Yeah, it's grounded in the times. And I was definitely growing up in like the turn of the century and sort of now we're in this tech age as well. And that, does change the conversation because I didn't grow up with tech and people weren't sharing their thoughts all over the internet. Like I felt like I had a lot of private thoughts and people weren't it wasn't as open.
And now you're going to publish them all.
Right. Yeah. So I find it enjoyable to look back and process some of these experiences and make them into entertaining moments in the book.
I like how you just laugh to think of some of the memory and thought, oh, that is funny. I like how.
Yeah, I guess it's just like a level of remove myself from it a little bit and kind of watch it as a objective person.
We didn't mention a lot about Journey Across the Bridge, but I wonder, like most of the film we talk today, are they going to go to your YouTube channannel? Like, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, it will be the plan.
Right. I'll be making them available on my channel. Stefie's channel.
Great. And I just want to add up a little like Journey Across the Bridge. What I love about it is we can hear one side the mother talk a lot, but there are a lot of visual detail about the daughter's reaction and also that just that is very. Anything you want to add on it, like all those details and stuff in the thinking?
Yeah, thanks, Fu. I'm glad you enjoyed that part. I think that seems to be a lot of the dynamics when interacting with Asian older people or moms.
Can you describe it real quick for anyone who hasn't watched it?
Oh, yes. So we are introduced to a moment in this train ride where a daughter and a mom goes in, and the mom has a lot to say about her friends' kids who are going to good schools and they're doing well. And she's saying a lot of these things while the child is just kind of looking at her, reading a book and not saying anything in return. And then she asked about what she wants to eat. And then she also would jive in sometimes and criticize, just criticize.
Just sneak them in little jabs.
Yeah. And then in the end, they just find a connection. And, in this film, I just wanted to explore the outward dynamics of them and also maybe some internal things that are not said and just kind of what connects the two or disconnects.
It comes through like at the end, the daughter's appreciation of her mother is like just glaring. Like the whole setup comes, and then when it's over, like the daughter is like, "Yeah, I get it."
Yeah,
wow.
Very clever. Like you need to really watch it and look the performance. That's a lot of acting involved, and you use it in animation to do the acting.
Thank you.
To know the real meaning underneath the real like line, the dialogue. So yeah, highly recommend. What's that first meal?
Oh, thank you, Johnny and Fu. Yeah, I'm glad that gets across because it is, it was one of those films where I wondered, oh, is it too subtle? Is it too kind of cerebral? Yeah,
it's solid.
So Johnny, like, I don't know, it's like for you, you get it, right? Like, do you feel that interaction in your culture, maybe? Like, it can happen too, that kind of interaction? Like, it's universal.
Being criticized by my mom and still loving her. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting to explore what that means. It's like a way of expressing love. It's a way of expressing concern and care. So yeah, I think it's just like a different way of communication, which I find interesting too.
I'm guessing part of it is just our parents at a certain time also had different views of that time in their head. And those things probably guided a lot of the comments we got too.
Yeah, I do think maybe it is cultural kind of language, that type of, and I say that because I used to tutor English, and it's still happening now in some ways. And I would have parents come in really concerned about their child's performance in school, and, you know, sort of similar language, you know, feel bad that I'm, you know, that they're spoken to like that and kind of in a public setting. But yeah, I think it is challenging, like that pressure to, it's different when you kind of understand, and maybe that takes some maturity, like maybe later when you've survived your adolescence to realize, okay, I think my parents care about me. But, you know, while going through it, it can be very difficult because you can internalize a lot of it. And I think that's why a lot of experiences are so interesting for me, because I see them now in a different way. Whereas before I was actually in it. Now it's funny because I'm like, wow, it's like funny, not in terms of like, haha, but it's funny,
Right.
like, oh,
Like that happened.
oh, it's like, yeah, it's kind of interesting that happened as a child, you know, how to interpret that. And being, you know, when you come from a culture that has a strong presence, I almost feel like it doesn't even need to come directly from my parents. It's just you're exposed to it, like from aunties, from strangers who feel like entitled to tell you just because they're in certain, you know, in your culture. So I think at first I'm exposed to a certain level of it. And I think that's why when I, you know, write about the elementary school experience, I think about that being set inside this whole cultural bubble. Yeah, I think there were sexist comments like, oh, you're supposed to look a certain way, like you're getting too fat, or, you know, or something. That's the physical part. And some things I might not have, you know, I might have just recognized immediately that, okay, I'm just going to let that glide off of me. But yeah, there are expectations still. And I think that it's not, I wouldn't say I think in this, as we do get more kind of I would hope that people are more emotionally tied to kind of just well-being and these ideas. I think that does help, but I think when you're exposed to certain ways of communicating or certain ideas, I think that's just, you know, you're being subjected to that. I think eventually people just have to challenge those ideas.
So that's an interesting word too, the challenging it. So you are now retrospectively re-examining all these things that you've grown up with, but you still have interactions with family members, right? So are there certain things that you push back against now after having had time to sit with them and think about it, making the films?
In those situations of someone, you know, being critical, oftentimes it's just like a more extended conversation. If they're willing to have a more extended conversation, I think that's probably the key to having more like a healthy communication, respectful dynamics, just more understanding and conversation. Because oftentimes those criticisms come and nothing's said back. It's just fires left and right, like attacks, and that's it. But, you know, sometimes just challenging that a little bit and having a conversation and around it does change the idea of, oh, where did that idea come from? Like, what are you really saying about that? And so, yeah, I think now I don't receive those directly as much anymore, but I do hear ideas, like I do feel them like see their presence, like maybe about somebody else, or overhear it. And I don't think sometimes I don't think that they're just like they're just happening in like Asian cultures. I feel like I see those ideas in a lot of different places. I think it's just general.
The era, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's just so strong, like general ideas of, you know, maybe just growing up in patriarchal structures. and media is so strong, like media's portrayal of women. It just takes a lot of work to break all those things down.
You have done a lot of stuff.
Oh, thanks.
But
I start a YouTube channel, and I'm going to talk about more things.
I just wanted to see you put the stuff out, because They're awesome films. And now knowing that you have writings from, you found your second grader journal. So you've had writings going back, well, I don't know how long, but for a while, and you're putting out a graphic novel. Like, yeah, you just got to put Stefie in the world.
Yeah, that's a new phase for me too. First it was like embracing my creative journey, but now it's just being more visible because I think it is hard sometimes to put yourself out there. You don't want to be seen as much. but I'm starting to embrace that too.
You are pushing back literally against everything you trained yourself to do as a child.
Right, exactly. And it's a learning experience for me. It does get uncomfortable, but I think the biggest idea that I keep with me is these are all human experiences. It's, trying to keep ego at the door. It's not really about me. It's about sharing our humanness and just being out there.
You're a very impressive person.
Oh, thank you, Johnny. And thank you, Johnny and Fu. I mean, thanks for chatting with me and having this podcast and being so positive. I mean, yeah, Fu, you're always so positive and encouraging people. I think it's great to have a person like you in the community.
Oh, thank you so much. I tried.
Fu's amazing. I'm clapping for Fu. Yes.
Yay.
Yeah. I have sound effect for that. Oh, anyway. Having a conversation with you, getting to know more about you, like I feel like wow, through art, maybe through graphic novel, through drawing, through film making, it's kind of self-healing process, and it's also help us to reflect and try to analyze through who we are, what we want to be, and what we can do for our society, and also express the voices really through all different kind of media. And yeah, keep us healthy. I feel like it's really keep us more healthy by express it out appropriately and entertaining way.
Yeah, it is a really rewarding journey as an artist. I think there are challenges. I mean, you go through first like, oh no, what's everybody going to think of this? And then eventually to this place of self-acceptance, like, well, this is me. So this is my work. And it's a privilege to be able to engage in creative works and continue to do it and share it. So I think I try to remember that and try to not think about why me, boo. Like, wow, I get to make cool things and share it. This is cool.
No, just like you mentioned you want to teach someday, right? So what might be okay, you only can pick one value you want to hand off to your student. What would that be?
I do want to teach to be bold in their work. I think everybody has something personal they want to say in their creative pieces. And I just want to create a safe space for them to explore that. I mean, they don't always have to share exactly what they want to say, but at least just to provide that safe space for them to explore something they wanted to share creatively. I think we're drawn to these creative spaces because of something we want to express, whether it's through entertainment or just jokes or something personal. That means something differently for everyone. So I think people do want to reach their potential or go towards it. So I want to encourage that. I think oftentimes when you're placed in a room full of other creatives, you can get very it could become a scary effect of, okay, now you're comparing yourself and but I think, I want people to find their voice and their own individual contribution.
Mm-hmm. And you are the great example that you start to express your voices just through your at school, the journey. You start to express them out, and you're getting closer and closer. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm glad I went for it because I could easily shy away from it, but then I thought, then there'll just be more of the same of previous, like, oh, I wish I would do this. And I'm like, well, now I'm given the chance, so better. I think oftentimes a lot of people want to be in the spotlight, but once it's given to them, it can be nerve-wracking. And to understand that each project is not, it's not the last. We learn from it and then we make another one. So we're always growing and we do our best at each phase.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
before we totally wrap up, you mentioned certain authors wrote books and you got that, like, let you really get into the character's head. Were there any in particular?
This one book is called Belzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. And maybe because I was Chinese and somebody gave me the book, I'm not sure, but it was like little to a pair of red shoes. I remember there was a scene in the book about two couple who kind of had the scandalous like sex scene. It was implied through like a sheet being read or something. But I remember reading, I was like, whoa, they talk about this in books. I mean, now we know like Judy Blume talks about those two, but I wasn't reading Judy Blume back then. But I just remember that powerful, like I was reading a lot of it and not getting most of it. And then I read, oh, wow, these like teenagers got into the situation. And then this third person had to cover it up or something like that. That was the moment I thought, wow, they write about things that happen to people in books. It's not just like boring stuff you need to learn or things like that. And I just remember that having a really big impression on me. And then that got me into reading more books. And it's like, oh, what do they have to say in these other books?
None of these are about the alphabet. These are amazing.
Yeah.
You asked the question for the next guest, but the previous guest had a question for you. The question is, it was Lindsay Birkenbile.
Would you rather have tongues for fingers or smell from your toes?
I would say taste with my hands. I think that would be pretty cool, actually. I'll have like 5 tongues. like a huge sensory experience.
Right. Think of how much ice cream you can go through. That would be amazing. They hand you an ice cream cone and you just put your hand on top of it and go, it's delicious.
Yeah, we already have our hands are already very sensory. So it's like super sad or super sensory. How did you two answer it?
Oh, Fu, what's your answer?
Then I'll try smell from my toes because it seems very inspiring. I don't know. Maybe it can change my perspective to the world, maybe.
I was going to say taste from my fingers, but then I realized if you can only smell from your toes and you're basically always wearing shoes and socks now, then you would only smell your feet, but that would be all you knew. So it wouldn't bother you.
It can
Probably.
be like just a secret power. I can wear sandals or slippers, right? I still can smell something. The grass.
Like most people are okay with their own BO. So if you smell from your toes, you might not care. But tasting from your hands, you got to pick up everything. Opposable thumbs. I got to grab stuff.
Yeah. Smelling from your toes would be great in nature and just in the grass.
Right. Until like you step in dog crap and you're like, oh no.
Oh no.
Yeah. But if you taste from your fingers, like if you're at like a theme park and every time you're grabbing the handrail to walk up like the stairs or something, oh, you just tasted millions of people.
Yeah.
You gotta wear gloves.
And then every glove would be flavored. It's like, oh, what flavor of gloves you gonna wear today? Watermelon. Nice. Ending a show is hard. We don't know how to do it. We decided never to do it. So we're going to let you do it. How do you want to end our show?
Yeah, let's say a thing we're grateful for, and then we can end it. And let's end it with positive emotions.
Things we're grateful for, featuring Stefie.
Well, I'm really grateful for my health. I'm feeling pretty good these days and kind of energetic. Yeah.
I'm grateful for my nieces and my nephew.
I am grateful for today. Stefie and Johnny together, we talked for over 2 hours. And thanks for the audience following till now.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for watching.
Yeah.